didn't even say a word. But they finally understood who you really are. That's the part that never leaves them. The haunting isn't in what you screamed, it's in what you withheld. You had every right to speak, to defend, to expose, to retaliate, but you chose not to. And that choice, that silence, it shook the architecture of their performance. It stripped the stage bare, because when a person built on manipulation, ego, and distortion meets someone who stops performing, the mask doesn't just slip, it collapses. You walked away without giving them a closing line. No final argument, no melodrama. Just that look, that silence, that stillness. And in that stillness, they saw themselves reflected, ugly, small, They mistook your restraint for hesitation. They thought your composure meant confusion. But what they misread was calculation. You were never unclear. You were just measuring if it was worth your energy, measuring the temperature of their lies, measuring the cost of staying versus the power of leaving. And when the scales tipped, you didn't warn them, you didn't explain, you simply moved. And that movement, wordless and permanent, said more than any monologue ever could. They learned who you were not because you told them, but because you stopped allowing them to tell you who you were. You withdrew the script, you exited the stage, and in the absence of your lines, their story fell apart. You were a mirror they thought they had shattered. They called you names, questioned your motives, mocked your depth. But now they're haunted by that moment, that final moment, when you looked at them, not with hate, not even with anger, but with awareness. Awareness that sliced deeper than rage. Awareness that said, I know what you are, and I refuse to carry it anymore. You didn't shout your worth. You carried it. You didn't beg for truth. You became it. And that kind of silent certainty is terrifying to people who depend on confusion to stay powerful. You walked in truth, and suddenly, everything they built started to rot in the light of your exit. They needed you to explain yourself so they could twist it. They wanted closure, not for healing, but for manipulation. They wanted one last chance to paint you as unstable, to bait a reaction they could label as emotional weakness. But you robbed them of that. You robbed them of their weapon, your voice. You gave them nothing, and in that nothing they were forced to face everything. They remember your silence, they replay it, they try to rewrite it. But no matter how they dress it up, it remains. You walked away, wordless and wise, and they finally understood. You were never theirs to define. There's a psychology to stillness. The manipulative mind interprets noise as data. It feeds on reaction, on performance. But when someone grows still, when someone stops giving emotional access, it triggers a deeper alarm. It creates an emptiness they can't fill with projection. You left them in that emptiness, not by accident, but as a final act of power. Because when you said nothing, you stripped them of control. No more arguments to win, no more feelings to exploit, no more narratives to twist. Just silence. And in that silence, a message. You lost the right to hear me. That lesson echoes louder than any shouted goodbye. You were not cold, you were complete. And that completion, that sovereign silence, carved your shape into their memory like a scar they can't cover. They now carry an image of you they can't distort. The version of you that didn't fight, didn't cry, didn't chase. The version that simply vanished without collapse. That's what lingers. Because they've encountered many people they could outsmart, outtalk, outmaneuver, but you ended the game without touching the board. You left them sitting with their own toxicity, unable to project it back onto you. And now, when they speak of you, they do so carefully. Even if they lie, their voice wavers, because they know you didn't lose, you transcended. They thought they won when you went quiet. They paraded your absence like a trophy, told stories where they were the savior, the one who tried. But behind closed doors, your silence infected their thoughts. Because deep down, even they couldn't believe the stories they told. They'd wake in the middle of the night and see your face. Not the wounded version, but the untouchable one, the one that left without needing to prove a thing. That is the image they can't delete. That is the moment they finally understood who you were, not because you explained yourself, but because you didn't need to. You didn't just leave the conversation, you dismantled the illusion. You showed them through silence what it means to carry truth without display. That kind of presence haunts louder than any speech. You became the unanswered question they asked themselves in the mirror. The shift they feel in every room they enter. The voice that never spoke yet says more than they ever will. You left no notes. You left no trace, but your energy still stains their conscience. You are the phantom limb they swore they didn't need until they reached for it and found air. That absence is what defines your presence now. The manipulative mind interprets noise as data. It feeds on reaction like a parasite, analyzing every twitch of emotion, every word spilled under pressure. To them, your anger is a breadcrumb trail. Your defensiveness is a confession. Your vulnerability, a ledger. They do not listen to understand. They listen to weaponize. They take your pain and plug it into an equation of control. They need you loud, disoriented, and leaking detail. Every protest you make, every clarification you offer, becomes a map they follow back to the buttons that break you. You think you're defending your truth, but they're harvesting your tone, your speed, your silence between sentences. They feed on it, not to nourish, but to calculate. That's their fuel. Your chaos is their comfort zone. You used to talk too much around them, not because you were weak, but because you were kind. You wanted to be understood. You thought clarity could disarm cruelty. But to the manipulative, clarity is just a more detailed target. The more you told them how you felt, the more they knew where to strike next. They weren't confused, they were collecting. They let you speak so you'd reveal the structure of your wounds. Then they designed their attacks with surgical precision. Your words weren't wasted. They were filed, stored, and reassembled against you later. That's how they win. Not with brute strength, but with borrowed truth. The manipulator's favorite sound is your voice under stress. It gives them a sense of dominion. If they can make you justify yourself, you become smaller in your own eyes. That's the real con. They don't need to scream. They just need you to talk. Because the more you talk, the more they disappear behind your emotional labor. You become the spectacle, you become the mess. And they stay calm, observant, innocent in appearance. While you bleed into the air, they remain dry. You think you're being honest, but they're playing analyst. And in their mind, your vulnerability is nothing more than ammunition. They treat arguments like audits. Every sentence you speak is dissected for inconsistency. They don't respond in real time, they record. You might even feel you've won the conversation, but days later, they'll bring back your words, twisted through their lens, turned against you in ways that feel surreal. That's how they keep you spinning. They memorize your logic, mimic your tone, and learn how to mimic sincerity when needed. They study your storms so they can predict your weather. And once they know how your lightning strikes, they'll never get caught in it again. They'll just redirect it into you. You notice now how calm they get when you're not. That's no coincidence. Your emotional storm is their lullaby. They want you flustered because it distracts you from the mechanics of their behavior. While you defend, explain, weep, or rage, they construct narratives. To everyone else, you are the volatile one. You are the overthinker. You are the one who's too much. They provoke, then step back and observe. You see a wound, they see a performance. You want repair, they want data. That's what you missed before. You were speaking human. They were speaking strategy. The manipulative mind can't interpret peace. Silence confuses it. It cannot extract value from what does not react. When you stopped arguing, when you stopped pouring your pain into explanations, you became unreadable, and that unreadability felt like betrayal. They had no new data to run their simulations. You didn't cry, you didn't plead, you didn't shout. You paused, and that pause shattered their blueprint. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't explain. Your silence was not passive, it was calculated absence. And now they are left starving for the fuel they once consumed freely. You stopped bleeding for people who kept track of your cuts. You no longer externalize your process for others to pick apart. You learned to sit with your discomfort in solitude, unwitnessed, unprovoked, unshared. That kind of stillness terrifies those who once controlled you with noise, because now you're dangerous. You're not wounded and wailing, you're healed and quiet. And the manipulative mind cannot play chess against someone who stopped placing pieces on the board. They sit across from an empty game, and they feel the loss, but they don't know why. They try to provoke the old version of you, the one who over-explained, the one who thought every misunderstanding required a symposium. But that version is gone, buried under years of exhaustion, replaced by someone who speaks sparingly and with purpose. They accuse you now of being cold, of being different. What they mean is, I no longer have access to your pain. And they're right. You shut the gates, and on the other side of those gates, you became undecodable. No more data, no more reactions, just a locked system designed for self-preservation. Now you watch them twitch when you're calm, because they know what you used to sound like when you were being manipulated, and this isn't it. You've changed frequencies. No more theater, no more defense, just presence. And that presence distorts their performance. They stutter when you stay calm. They stumble when you don't take the bait. You're no longer reactive, you're reflective. And in that mirror, they finally see themselves. That's what they always feared. Not your rage, not your words, your clarity. They used to script your responses before you even opened your mouth. They built entire narratives on the assumption that you would play your part, the over-explainer, the fixer, the forgiver. But now, there's nothing left to script. You no longer move according to their cues. You've stepped off their stage and burned the costume. Now, when they poke, prod, provoke, they're met with something they don't recognize. Stillness forged from truth. You do not react, you observe. And in that quiet observation, they feel the most unfamiliar sensation of all: accountability. You don't hand it to them, you force them to sit with it. And the manipulative mind, starved of performance, begins to rot from the inside out. They talk to others about your silence as if it's a flaw, as if your refusal to engage is the real betrayal. But deep down, they remember every reaction they stole from you. Every moment you offered your heart, and they dissected it for weakness. They fear you now because they know what you're capable of. Not destruction, but distance. And that distance, that unflinching, measured, untouchable distance, is the punishment they can't escape. They hear your name in their own mind now, not as a victim, but as a verdict. A reminder that someone once saw everything and chose to walk anyway. No explosion, no public revenge, just sovereignty. Unapologetic, unbothered, and unreachable. You never needed to destroy them. You needed to reclaim yourself, and you did, by recognizing that your peace was not something to be negotiated, that your silence was not emptiness, it was evolution. The manipulative mind cannot comprehend an evolution it didn't orchestrate, so let them twist, let them guess. You've become the closed book they'll never reopen, the unsolved riddle that shakes their confidence. You didn't leave breadcrumbs, you left the whole table. And now they sit in their own hunger, still calculating a pattern that no longer exists. You broke the loop, you ended the algorithm, and in doing so, you became the only variable they can no longer manipulate, the one that left without a trace.